Today's episode is brought to you by HP Poly, where premium audio and video meet hybrid work. From headsets to video bars, HP Poly keeps your team connected, clear, and collaborative. Learn more at cdw.ca/poly. Hello and welcome to the CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast. I'm your host, KJ Burke, Field CTO for Hybrid Infrastructure at CDW Canada. In this episode, we're going to discuss challenges and strategies to unlock the power of the data within our organization. We're going to discuss some of the common challenges with data, such as the quantity of data, the quality of data, and the risk of bad or dangerous data that we have in large data sets. We're going to cover some of the processes and the technologies available to address these issues. And we're going to discuss about the future of data and how high quality data is increasing both in quantity and need and value. So for this talk, I'm really excited to be joined by Qaiser Habib. He's the Director of Engineering and a Toronto site lead, also Head of Engineering for Snowflake Canada. But, you know, Snowflake is obviously a big organization. Some of our customers maybe and listeners haven't really spent a lot of time digging into Snowflake. Can you tell me a little bit about Snowflake and a little bit about your role in the organization?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's a real pleasure. So Snowflake was founded in 2012 by our founders, Benoit and Thierry, to solve a very particular problem, which is also very prevalent. As you know, data has been called the oil of the modern industry, right? And so many organizations sit on data in many different shapes or forms in many different systems. But the one thing that is prevalent is data silos. It's very hard to combine this data and make sense of it and do processing with it, right? So Snowflake comes into the play very gracefully. We are a cloud-based, something we call a data and AI cloud. We are fully managed. And basically what we allow companies to do is eliminate these silos, manage, store, process, distribute their data, build applications. And the beauty of Snowflake is that it just works. There are no knobs. We offer a very simplified experience. And behind the scenes, we have a very unified architecture that handles structured and unstructured data. We offer, data lake, data warehouse type of access. Mm-hmm. We're fully scalable, infinite scale. Similarly, from a developer experience standpoint, we offer a lot of extensibility in languages that are familiar to you, in like Python, like Java, and things like that. On ML side as well, there's very sophisticated model training. You can run transformations, as well as for analytics, application development, things like that. There's pretty deep native support in the data cloud. And then, if you want to build data applications, which are an order higher than your standard analytics use cases, we offer pretty sophisticated technologies like Snowflake native apps, Snowpark, things like that, which allow you to build on top of it. So we are truly a one-stop shop for any things you want to do with data and AI in the enterprise. And the other part is that we're fully secure, right? So from use cases ranging from medical industries to governments to standard enterprise, as well as companies of smaller startup scale, all the way to Fortune companies. We offer just support that works right out of the box.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And, security used to be something that we thought about afterwards, and now more and more it's got to be baked in. And the other thing that I've noticed is that it used to be that we talked about people, process, and technology, and that was sort of the three-legged stool of IT. And now more and more, to me, it seems to be a four-legged table with people, process, technology, and data. And I think data, we always just treated it as sort of part of the IT or part of what we were doing. But a lot of times it was the business that kind of owned the data. And so, so let's talk a little bit about how we got here. Historically, that IT perspective is data is, kind of in the domain of the business. Has that lack of accountability from a legacy IT perspective created some of the challenges that we have as data grows and as the demand to service more applications and AI has grown over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said very well, right? Data is one of the key pillars now of any organizations. And what has happened is any system, if you let it be, it generates tons and tons of data. And this data often gets stored. And so today there's organizations sitting on sometimes like over decades of data. And so there's a lot of insights in that data. There's a lot you can do with it. There's a lot that from that data you can help drive strategy, help drive your future business. But obviously to handle this data is a challenge of its own. But that then creates challenges for IT teams and governance teams and things like that, because data is sensitive. Not everybody should have access to everything in a uniform way. If put in the wrong hands, it can be potentially disastrous for organizations, as well as moving data is a thing of its own, right? So you can't just if it's stored in let's say a secure storage, right? You can't just move that data just like that, right? And then there's things like scalability. Cost is a concern of its own. And so in the modern enterprise, it's such a big challenge for teams that handle this data to do this securely. And there are trade-offs. With anything, there are trade-offs, right? So if you want to have speed, you're going to have to compromise on some of the other aspects of it, right? If you want to do things in a faster way, maybe the cost is going to be a little bit higher. So that's where companies like Snowflake come in, because what we offer is, first of all, many teams don't have the right skill set, right? If they're building their own data warehouses, if they're having to deal with all of the compute that they need, all of the storage needs that they have from scratch, it's tough. It's very hard to do that. So what we offer is like day one deployment, right? Like you point us at your data. There's a lot you can do with it just without having any specialized skill sets in the internals of a data warehouse and things like that, right? And so we take away some of that burden. But then also there are a lot of things that you get on the governance side, on the security side, on the scalability side, without having to turn any knobs. But if you do want to customize things, if you do want to turn knobs, if you want to set custom rules and things like that, we have the ability to do that, right? So long story short, I think the needs for very strong IT teams have gone exceptionally higher as the need for data has grown. And then AI just throws another wrinkle into the whole mix, right? Because now we're talking people, there's lawsuits happening on people, the models training on somebody's data that it was not authorized to do so. And so that's a challenge of its own.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think we'll talk a little bit about kind of when we get to this section, how we mitigate some of these challenges. I think you're right. I think platforms and helping teams be more effective, where the technology really includes a lot of the capabilities and makes it easier to consume is critical. So, when you in your estimation, like, well, I guess in your experience working with some customers, how long have some of these organizations been hoarding data? Have they been just hoarding data from the beginning of time, or is there a point where maybe organizations started to hoard data more often than they had in the past?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So when I talk to customers, it's a very wide mix.
Hmm.
But one thing I can tell you for sure is that most companies were hoarding data from the very early time they started, right? They didn't know why. Sometimes they didn't know what they're going to do with this data. And so sometimes I'll talk to, for example, airlines or banks, right? And so they have data from the mainframe systems that they run, and they don't even know how to look inside. They don't know how to make sense of that data, right? Especially in the unstructured domain. Recently, we were having a conversation with one of the airlines, in Canada, and what they mentioned was like, I have this mountain, this heap of documents and other types of unstructured data. Help me make sense of it. Tell me how. I know there's a ton of value in there. I know there's a ton of insights in there and patterns that I can unlock, but I don't know how to kind of process it at scale. And so we were able to help them out. They were very happy with the final outcomes. But it's not unheard of to sometimes see data that is multiple decades old, and companies want to kind of bring that online and make sense of it.
I think that's a really good point too, especially when you think about AI as a bit of a Swiss Army knife when it comes to interacting with data, and so I think I think potentially that's going to empower more organizations to move forward quicker. So when you think about the business's relationship with data, and how that sort of impacted IT teams, obviously there's been opportunities like with Snowflake to solve some of these challenges. But how has that business's relationship and expectation of what they get out of data changed over the last few years?
Oh, this is such a fantastic. Maybe like 3 years, the IT teams have been forced to get very close to their data and be experts in it and know it inside and out. In the olden days, right, 10 years ago, yes, there were mountains of data that teams were sitting on and they were governing that data, but all they needed to do was basic sanity checks, basic controls, making sure the data, has some freshness to it, but mostly it's secure, it doesn't get in the wrong hands,
Hmm.
and usually it would be archives, right? Like, so if you get a request for something that aligns within your SLAs for archiving data, yes, you would be able to pull that data, and it was okay if it took some time because nobody expected you to pull that data in real time.
Yeah.
Even in systems like Gmail and others, right? Like if you go and look at your emails from several years ago, it takes a bit of time to kind of load that from cold storage.
Hmm.
So that was acceptable. That was okay, right? But fast forward to today, suddenly now AI is the new hype. And for AI, any AI model to work well, it starts with the data. The data has to be high quality, the data has to be fresh, the data has to be governed, the data has to be secure, and then it has to be moved around, right, for various systems. And then another extreme version of this is mass distribution, because now companies need to distribute this data and also
Hmm.
the insights that models generate. And so that is just a world of its own. And the teams that work with this data have to evolve dramatically. There's completely different set of teams, completely different set of skill sets that are required to handle this data, right? And so that's where tools like what we offer, right? So for example, we have something called Snowflake Native Apps. This solves the distribution challenge for you. Because why? Because imagine one company doing a transaction with another company. They would need a lot of handshaking to trust each other.
Hmm.
And now we sit in the middle and we're saying, hey, you have a ML model or an application, and you need to run it through data that another company has. Well, you don't need to do any handshaking. We can be in the middle, and so we'll take your model, we'll take your data, and we'll map those two together. So that kind of alleviates some of the burden. But at the end of the day, the fact remains that today's IT teams, today's governance and security teams have to be extremely data aware.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And so are there other ways that the types of tools that are needed, and obviously Snowflake being so tied in with data, but are there other ways that the tools and the applications have changed in relation to solving some of those other business challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, the most fundamental thing is storage, right?
Mm.
Where the data was stored has dramatically shifted. There's a big push towards the cloud, right? So that's why Snowflake is an AI and data cloud. So that's one fundamental shift, and suddenly that changes the mindset. Like based on compared to on-premise systems, compared to like cold storage, compared to like something that was there was a rack and you just had to use it kind of in that. But then, now you go into like in the cloud itself, the even that has matured so dramatically in the last, I want to say like 10 years. So it used to be that, okay, like is for example, what's volume of data do you have? Who has access to this data? What type of like governance rules have you put on it? Like that was pretty much what was needed, right?
Hmm.
Now in the new world, like for example, we found that some companies had data was online, like let's say if it was public facing. So, you don't want some model to train on it. This is your
Mm.
proprietary data. So now you need to have tools that allow you to kind of stop this type of access, right? Um, Similarly, you may want to distribute your data yourself. And so that's another way to kind of, you need to build tooling for that, right? To allow you to safely distribute this thing. But also, the workflows is another very important dimension, right?
Hmm.
An average data scientist, an average data engineer now needs to do way more sophisticated stuff that before used to go to maybe like developers, right? They used to bring in teams of software engineers to do this stuff. For example, you need a very sophisticated developer experience. You need to have CI/CD systems, right? You need to have, from an insight generation standpoint, it's no longer just dashboards. There's very deep applications you need to build. And so in today's world, you can do in Snowflake so much stuff that you would need to go to AWS, GCP, or Azure before and write lots and lots of code, right? Now you can write that code in Snowflake itself. And so it's a higher order now, right? And so that requires, very sophisticated tooling, very sophisticated technologies to be able to work with the data.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point around kind of what's changing, and I'd like to, focus a little bit around sort of that access to data and that conversation. I think you're right. I mean, I think that if I go back to sort of early in my career, a lot of the data that was really core for the business that I worked for was kind of in specialized systems, and I think you're right. I think this need to have data available to be able to operate, especially with AI, have it available so that I can use it for other tools to find other insights, to mine that data and get additional value out of it. That really requires that it's available in an accessible manner. I love that you talked about portability, because portability is definitely one of those things we talk about with our customers quite a bit. But you still need to have access and controls around that. So what are some of the things, what are some of the aspects of data access control that maybe listeners haven't thought about, but that you deal with as this need for data has changed?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most fundamental shift that is happening is that towards self-service. So in the old world, you used to have analysts, right? And every C-suite was way, several layers separate from their data, because they would submit a request to their analyst and then they would mine the data, process it, and generate the insights for them. In today's world, the C-suite wants to just go and talk to their data themselves, right?
Hmm.
And so that's an exciting possibility, because now suddenly, a CEO, a COO, a CTO can make decisions much faster. But that then opens so many challenges, because now you have this level of access that you need to grant that you couldn't even fathom before. So that does mean there's a lot more security you have to put in place, a lot more governance you have to put in place. And so that's the very first challenges, right? Is that, making sure the right people have the right access, which means where you store your data needs to have that capability at the granularity that you need, because data can be so different, right? So you may have data about your employees' HR information, their compensation, their performance history, things like that. That's very different than, let's say, a given system emitting some logs,
Hmm.
and some traces, right? So one is maybe used for debugging some things, and the need for, like, extremely tight security may be lower. Maybe the speed is more important there, but on the other hand, it's very sensitive data. So that is a set of challenges that needs to be resolved. And then agentic access just throws another dimension to this, right? So now, humans have limited capability of how much data they can process,
Hmm.
but agents don't have such limits. So how do you make sure that, agents do what they're expected to do? Because on the one hand, you can block things and you can say, well, I don't want to build applications that are, let's say, HR agents, right? But then on the other hand, you're stifling innovation, because the world is just not moving at that pace. Other than that, there are issues with compliance, right? So you need to still meet the compliance requirements. You need to still offer very strong audits, right? And so, at the petabyte or above scale, how do you offer such audit mechanisms, right? And so that means, if you need to go at a particular granularity, if you're emitting a lot of logs, a lot of traces, a lot of events, you still need to, have the retention policies in place. You need to retain data, go back in time to a particular duration, but then also you need to filter out sensitive data from those events and those logs and those things like that, right? So that's another aspect to this. So you do need to adhere to regulatory requirements, to compliance requirements,
Hmm.
but on the other hand, you also need to make sure that, your systems are able to support it. Also, the other side of this is then, structured versus unstructured, right? That's a whole debate of its own, and that opens another set of challenges as well.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that. Before that though, Do you, one of the advantages I guess that you and I both have in our roles is we talk to a lot of different customers, and so one of the things that I think is really important is to kind of bring insights on where we see differences or where we see gaps. And so when you think about the leaders at these organizations, the C level and the C suite, do you see sort of a common understanding of the importance of data across those different organizations? Do you maybe see certain verticals maybe have put more value into the data that they've collected? What are some of the things that you see, from a CXO level?
Yeah, absolutely. There's such a dramatic shift. I talked to a lot of C-suite, a lot of senior leaders at companies, and the one trend I notice is that there's a lot more urgency now.
Mm,
Um, there, so C-suite is being held accountable for how much they adopt AI, how much they're well versed in their data, and so that is driving then a lot of different behaviors, different type of mindset when they approach data. So first of all, as I mentioned earlier, it's a lot more hands-on, a lot more self-serve,
mhm.
right? Any C-suite today don't need to go far. They just, if they have a co-pilot experience, they can point it at a set of data. If there's a good model in the middle, they can just start asking questions of their data, right? So they want to know how business is doing, where are my bottlenecks, how is the supply chain, what's moving slow, what's moving fast. They can just ask, right? They don't need to wait for like teams to build them dashboards and what have you. On the other hand, there's also a need now to unify analytics. So it used to be that there were silos of information
Hmm.
in very different systems, right? Some were legacy systems, some were modern systems. Um, that's no longer acceptable because the insights you need require you to join this data, right? And so that requires a sophistication and scale that is just unprecedented, and especially in the world of AI, right? So there's a lot of unification requirements. And obviously, like C-suite is accountable for governance and security, and so that's they expect it. It's a given, right? There's no negotiation. There's no lowering the standards there. And so in the AI world, C-suite is trying to figure out, okay, what does that mean for the security 2.0, the governance 2.0? How can I not only govern and secure data, but also my models, my AI agents? And so that's a challenge of its own, which is becoming pretty critical. And so, there's tools like, for example, data quality, data lineage. They're becoming front and center for many organizations, many C-suite, as they make those decisions. And then, the other side of this is just um, logistics. So data comes with a lot of logistics stacks, and what that means is basically your organization is structured a particular way. When you onboard into a data platform, you need to make sure that that data platform adheres to your organizational structure, your policies, things like that. And so this is a typical battle between speed and getting it right. On the one hand, you do need to move fast, there's urgency, but on the other hand, you can't compromise on certain standards. And so that's where there's a lot of debate going on in the industry right now on, what do we do in this case? Like, we can bypass a lot of the, they're calling it bureaucracy now, but this exists for a reason. And so how do you draw the right balances as well?
Yeah, it's a really good point because, and I think that in a lot of ways, that's where having vetted platforms can really provide value. Where you've gone through your due diligence and you've established what are the, how do we align with our governance? How do we align with our strategy? How do we align with our access control policies? And because you've invested in building that platform, then all of a sudden that becomes the key to at least not creating more problems in the future, right? Um, so yeah, I think to call back to, you touched on this just a moment ago. What has really been the shift in demand for unstructured versus structured data? I mean, again, if I go back to early in my career, those sort of closed systems that housed a lot of the intellectual property, our financials, our, those are very closed systems. Um, but if we think of AI as kind of a business transformation tool, um, as you point out, the more data you have and the more different types of data you have from different areas of your business, that you can bring together, that's really powerful. And not all of that is in a structured data set. So what are you seeing from a demands of around unstructured and structured, and how do we sort of bring some of those things together?
Yeah, absolutely. This is so fundamental to the AI world. And here's why. See, in the old world, the data was structured. What that means is there was a lot of effort put into making it structured,
Hmm.
right? There were tables, there was consistent schemas, right? And you could pretty easily go and look into a given table. It follows certain rules, right? You would expect it to be a certain shape. In the new world, so that was not natural. It took a lot of effort, a lot of compute, a lot of processing. In the new world, the trend that I'm noticing is that the world is moving towards more and more unstructured because that's just natural. That's how the world works. The world is not really structured, right? Like people just talk, people produce documents, and if there's a IoT sensors, things like that, they just produce the logs that they need to produce. So what has to happen is the AI systems, the models, have to meet the data where it is, as opposed to expecting the data to be bent into a certain shape. And
Hmm.
so that's where the true innovation is coming. In fact, there was a recent research by Forrester and IDC, and over 80% of the world's data is now unstructured
Hmm.
at rest. And even more than that is that in the new data that gets generated, 90% or more is unstructured. So that speaks to the trends that we're seeing, right? And so what does that mean for modern systems, modern data systems, as well as modern AI systems? So this, first of all, this unlocks so many use cases that we didn't thought were possible. So going back to the example of the airline I was talking to, right? So these guys had so many documents, and they were sitting on those documents. Then the best they could do would be like maybe try to parse, like do some searches of strings and whatnot, right? Or some human-powered analysis. But in today's world, there's LLMs, there's things like document AI at Snowflake even that can traverse through those documents at scale and help you generate insights super easily, right? And so with unstructured data becoming easily accessible, easily processable, now there's so many use cases you can unlock. And so now imagine documents have existed since, thousands of years, right? So think about the possibilities there. So with the modern systems, I think the future belongs to unstructured data. This is not to say there will not be structured data. There's still going to be a lot of it, but now the data platforms, the AI platform has to evolve, and we're more, that suddenly allows you to put a conversational interface on top of this system, and then as we use terms like talk to your data, so you can do that. But here's the interesting bit that I'm noticing a pattern of. In addition to requiring conversational interfaces, the teams are also looking for more structured interfaces to unstructured
Hmm.
data, right? And what does that mean? That means you want a SQL interface to talk to your mountain of documents and generate insights from that so that you can then plug in that interface into your other system and build on top. So
Interesting.
composability is becoming super critical now.
Yeah, and I find it, especially when you think about like multiple modalities of data and data collection. Um, my video analytics data is not really a structured format. It's not in a SQL, database someplace. And so yeah, so I think you're right. Um, so again, when I think about the business owning the data, a lot of times it was really incumbent upon the business to then also measure the quality of the data, govern the data. And it seems like, especially as you point out, this increased importance of unstructured data that's being created in all manner of different ways. Um, how is that changing the way that the expectations we have for IT teams and application developers? Maybe they were more consumers of data or stewards of data, but now they're really having to be in charge of the quality of the data or finding tools, as you mentioned, that can curate data.
Yeah, absolutely. So data quality has become significantly more important now than before. And the reason for that is we have our data, the data gets processed, or let's say a model gets trained on top, which is very costly. And then that model gets other data to then generate insights. If you get the data wrong, not only does this cost go to waste, right? The model training cost, but then also any insights you generate in the future, right? It's just not right. So in concrete terms, teams today need to have data quality insights.
Hmm.
And what I'm noticing is because of the scale of data that we deal with, it has to be automated. It's just not scalable to do data quality checks manually every single time. And so more and more there's a need for basic stuff, right? There's metrics like freshness, there's metrics like null checks, things like that. These are considered table stakes. You have to have them. Then there's things like data profiling, right? So that happens as part of these are some of the checks, like what are the min max values, what does the distribution look like, what type of null counts. But then there are second order checks that need to go on top of it, right?
Mm.
But at the end of the day, it has to be automated. And then there's also a continuous monitoring aspect to this. So now that you understand how to check the quality of your given data, starting from basic sanity checks to then defining your own rules on top, to what does it mean for me to have higher order checks, then it goes into like, how do I make it a systems job, a computer's job,
Hmm.
to continuously monitor this data and let me know if at any point in my pipeline the data is not the right one, so that I can short circuit it right there without the bad data flowing through and then polluting other systems, right? And so today's teams must be equipped with such tools. And then also, on top of that, their workflows should be designed so that they can work around these tools. When an alert comes in that the data is bad quality, what do, right? How do you fix it? And then that goes into like cross-team integrations, cross-team collaboration. How do you work with then the source of your data or the team who generated it to kind of fix these issues as well?
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you don't just talk about the superficial challenges, but again that sort of layer 2, layer 3, layer 4. Once you've solved the readily apparent challenges, all of a sudden other issues start to come to the forefront. So I think that's critical. So of those challenges in your experience, um, what are the key challenges? Like what are the real showstoppers when it comes to organizations really trying to better manage their data, better create higher quality data? What are those key challenges? You mentioned a bit automation, but what are the main stumbling blocks?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, data has to be collected from so many different sources, right? So that's one of the foundational challenges, that how do you put quality checks in place on so many different
Hmm.
systems as you ingest them, right? So that's a pretty complicated thing, and that's why you have to unify the data into a data lake or data warehouse. And usually for unstructured data, like there's excellent support, for example, in platforms like Snowflake. So that's the defrag that needs to happen on fragmented set of data. Ingestion itself, especially in real-time use cases, is pretty complicated. So how there's cases where they're not latency sensitive, and they have their own set of challenges around security, around scale, around cost. But then on real-time use cases, it's just a different world altogether, right? So how do you make sure that you do your checks, but they don't come at the cost of latency, right? How do you make sure things don't slow down? Also, scale and availability is an issue,
Hmm.
right? So you want to make sure that your systems are able to handle the scale of data you deal with, right? So many organizations have petabyte scale or above, and so how do you kind of handle that? And how do you make sure things don't crash? How do you make sure that your systems keep up on the SLAs that you expect them to stay up, right? And obviously, all of this is great, but if it's too costly, right, then you will just not do anything with the data. So cost is such a fundamental concern, and you have to be very strategic about the design of the systems in the first place, but then also constant optimizations to kind of stay up with the cost. Um, and then there's at the end of the day, there's a lot of like custom logic that organizations need to do,
Hmm.
right? So it's not as simple as moving data from point A to point B. You need to have your own transformations in there, which are very specific business logic, and you need to do those at scale in real-time situations. And so that's where technologies like Apache NiFi, which we launched Snowflake OpenFlow on top, really help, because they allow you to write your custom transformation logic and then build your pipelines at scale on top of those.
Yeah, and I think that's really important too, because you're at the end of the day, the differentiation is really in that logic. The being able to take your data, which only you have, and unlock differentiating business value from it is critical. The other thing we run into a lot is and I think the oil analogy that you used earlier is really good, because it's like, yeah, your data is oil, but the unstructured data that's just sitting out there is all your crude oil. Once you start to refine it, once you start to create that logic, once you start to really make like the jet fuel or the gasoline out of that oil, all of a sudden that becomes very useful for the business. And then data resiliency becomes a challenge, because it's like, well, we did all this work and we invested all this time, and now how do we take care of it and make sure that it's protected and you're right, governed, and all of that. So absolutely, I think the more time we spend here, the more important that data really becomes. Um,
Absolutely.
so when you think about sort of the general maturity journey, I like to think of technology as kind of a maturity journey, and customers are on they're somewhere on that maturity journey. So when they look at their data management, when they look at the way that they're collating their data and curating their data, the way they're protecting their data, there's always ways to improve. But what does that maturity journey look like for organizations, as they go through and really look to, bring their data together and then eventually unlock the value of that data?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll answer this from the angle of what we see when we go and start conversations with companies, right? So typically, companies will approach us when they're starting to think about, either they already have some data systems or they don't, and they're looking to do more with their data. So the very first step in the maturity journey, obviously, is realizing, hey, our data is now significant enough that we need to now do stuff with it, and maybe generate insights, maybe process it, maybe build more applications on top. So it usually starts with limited use cases, limited functionality, but more in an experimental mode. Like, people are skeptical. Imagine a startup, right, that is maybe 1 or 2 years old. So they do have a bunch of data that their systems are generating, but they're not sure about the ROI. They have limited resources, so they just don't want to go all in, right? So they're very skeptical. So it's a lot of POCs, proof of concepts, experiments at this stage. And what they do is they typically have limited use cases that they want to try it on. So once that happens, and oftentimes, I mean, it's a proven model. There's millions of dollars being spent on data in per organization. So they realize, oh wow, this is great. Like, from a marketing standpoint, from a future strategy standpoint, from insight generation, decision making, there's a lot of value in this data. And so then what they do is they go and productionize the limited use cases, right? And they turn those into typically applications or dashboards or things that their teams start to use. And so that's all well and good, but the complexity comes when now they want to onboard multiple teams, multiple use cases,
Hmm.
multiple organizations. And so suddenly there's different access controls, there's different governance controls, different visibility, and also, just data movements, migration requirements
Mm.
that have to be taken into account. And so that's when a lot of these type of challenges come up, right? My marketing systems live in this system, this SaaS application, or this, cloud-based data storage, right? But then my HR systems are legacy, and so they're in on-premise. So how do we combine so that we still, everybody kind of makes use of those? So that's usually the second stage, is like the multi-use case scenarios and the challenges that come with it. And then they go into now they've adopted multi-use case. They're all reaping the benefits, right? And so now they want to scale it up.
Mm.
Scale becomes a concern in this case, because many systems just don't have this infinite scale that we do, right? And so how do you kind of meet the customer where they are, and keeps growing with them, so they don't outgrow us, right? And so that is not just about scaling as well. It's also about scaling with high quality, with high availability, right? And also keeping up with things like security vulnerabilities, right? There's
Mm.
updates to libraries, to technologies that come up. Also, like, the warehouses, the compute elements need to keep optimizing, right? They need to keep getting faster and better. And so that's where the stage three comes in. And typically at this stage, cost becomes a much bigger concern, because now they have a very large chunk of data into the data system, right? And so now they start looking into, can we start monitoring the cost, and can we start optimizing the cost? So that's where platforms like Snowflake really shine, because throughout this journey, we have just the right level of support, right? We don't bombard you with too much, but we also don't give you too less, and you will not outgrow us as your kind of data journey matures over time.
And I think that's important because I think with a lot of the conversations we have around things like AI, um, being able to start small, being able to prove out, being able to show value, and then be able to grow. Obviously, yeah, and not every solution does scale. That's a very valid point to make. So one of the things we talked about earlier was really around self-service. And so as organizations mature through that process and they start looking at self-service solutions for the business, how does that change things for the IT or the data platform teams, and how do they sort of go about tackling some of those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier I mentioned how the C-suite wants to now play with the data, with the applications hands-on, right? They don't want to be disconnected from it, and it's just too slow to keep waiting on a human in the middle to answer their questions, right? So that's like the culture cultural shift that we're seeing, especially in the world of AI. But yes, that's all well and great, but then there are teams behind the scenes whose job it is to do this, while maintaining integrity and security and compliance and privacy. And so that's where the challenges come in,
Mm.
right? On the one hand, you want to democratize your data, you want to have organic adoption of your data, but then on the other hand, you have to have very tight controls, right? So you need to make sure that, first of all, let's look at access control. You need to have very granular access control so that an administrator has a different level of access than an average employee in a given company than the CEO of the company. So too less and too high are both bad things. And so you need to have the granularity, and you need to meet the companies where they are. And what I'm seeing is, like, they want to have access, at the row level, right, at the table level, at the view level, at the schema level, and so on, right? So that's the access control dimension of this.
Mm.
Other than that, it's also things like just looking at scalability and that type of thing, right? So the needs are very different across the teams that use the data, and so IT teams have to make sure that the systems scale, right, while maintaining the cost and things like that. Um, Tooling is another interesting part. So you have the data, sure, but how do you people interface with it?
Mhm.
And there are conversational interfaces. Yeah, a CEO may want to ask questions of it, and they're happy. But what about an engineering team? They'd want to use this data in, let's say, what offerings they give in the website, in a
Mhm.
SaaS application, right? And so they need programmatic access. So we need to now offer drivers and APIs and SDKs. And so those come with their own sets of challenges, right? So it's integration tax that you have to give as well. And then there's things like retention policies, right? Things like compliance controls. How do you adhere to government requirements? How do you adhere to privacy requirements? Things like that. And finally, when you take care of all of this, the biggest issue you deal with is complexity and cost.
Mm.
So you've built this system. It's very powerful. It makes everyone happy, but now you're unhappy because you have to deal with so much complexity, right? And so that's requires, very sophisticated systems, easy to use systems, and do that all at a cost that is sustainable to the companies.
Yeah, it's a good point, and we used to say you could have it fast, you could have it cheap, or you could have it quality, and yeah, and I think in some ways that platforms and at large scale, organizations like Snowflake that can kind of come in with a methodology and a platform that can be adopted. I think it helps with the speed and complexity and the quality, and then you're right, being able to size it appropriately for the cost is critical. um,
Yeah.
so are there, as organizations are looking to move forward with these data projects, are there certain frameworks or certain governance frameworks that you'd recommend, or that you would point people to help standardize and speed up their ability to build these and adapt to this new data world?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, the biggest recommendation I always tell people is look at your data platform and what does it offer natively. Like, great, there are third-party tools, there are third-party applications, and some of them I've been very impressed with. They're fantastic.
Hmm.
But the platform that you use has to have at least the basic capabilities from right out of the box, right? Like things like data quality, things like role-based access control, right? Things like basic security, MFA type of things, right? So those would have to come from the platform, right? And then it goes into like how sophisticated do you want to get? For example, one trend that we're noticing now is organizational leaders want to see their data, all their data in a format that aligns with their org structure, right?
Hmm.
So whether it's cost, whether it's security audits, whether it's compliance controls, right? They want to know, they want to map it back to their organizational leaders so they can hold their people accountable accordingly, right? And so it also aligns with their budgets policies. It aligns with kind of their ceremonies that they conduct, holding different leaders accountable.
Hmm.
And so that's like frameworks that are now required. They're becoming table stakes. And so that's why those come out of the box with Snowflake, right? We have organization views that allows you to kind of see at a glance what's going on in your organization based on the kind of the org hierarchy, right? Um, and then there's also things like workflows, right? So what type of workflows do you conduct, and how does the system meet you there, right?
Hmm.
So those are, so for example, different teams have needs for, let's say, replication, right? They want to have both from a disaster management standpoint, they want to have the data replicated, right? But then also sometimes it's different systems, right? And some teams want to have cross cloud or this type of replications. So Snowflake offers that from scratch, which would be very hard to do if you were to deal with, every cloud or every AZ or things like that yourself. And so these are things that we offer out of the box. But I would say at a high level, the modern world, things like governance, things like data quality, freshness, lineage, org views are table stakes. The platform has to support them. And in fact, very recently we had some customers who um, were looking to make deals with some third-party vendors for data quality reasons. And when they found out that Snowflake offers those things right out of the box, actually they switched over to us, and they made deals with us because of these reasons, right? So these are super critical.
Yeah, that data portability and having the ability to work within, again, within a framework and a platform, I think is critical. So what types of tools are available for organizations as they're building these AI projects? How do we start to tie in, AI closer to, the data platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So see, it starts with data movement, right? First of all, like data lives in very different places. How do you unify it so that the models can work on top of them? And so for that, for example, at Snowflake, we have a migrations tool called Snow Convert, right? We recently started offering it for free. And so that allows you to kind of do migrations from many different systems, right, very easily. But then we also recently launched Snowflake OpenFlow. And so what that is it's a NiFi based, Apache NiFi based generic ingestion and transformation engine. So you just point it at some data sources, you specify some frequency of the data movements, right? And it just does the jobs for you. And it has over 200 connectors, right? So you can talk to so many different systems where the data is stored.
Hmm.
So those are like, for you to do any AI stuff, you have to nail your data strategy. And to nail your data strategy starts with where does the data live and
Hmm.
how do you move it into this unified platform. On top of that, then it's all about now you have the data, let's say it's in your data platform, right? How do you then connect it to your compute elements, right?
Hmm.
How do you allow it so that models can train on it, so models can access this data, right? Things like that. And so that's where connectivity comes in. And so we have a very sophisticated developer experience. So it goes into things like connectors, like drivers, and these drivers, depending on the team you have, you may have Python experts, you may have people who do just SQL. You may have people who do JavaScript, Java. And so you have to meet teams where they are. And that's one of the philosophies we take to heart is meeting developers where they are. so they can allow their models, their compute elements, their applications to plug into the data. Then it goes into observability, debuggability, quality monitoring. So you can build the most sophisticated models and apps, but if you cannot debug it, if you cannot monitor it, right, you're going to be flying blind. And so this is where we offer a lot of things like task graphs, like pipeline monitoring logs, lineage, right out of the box, right? Telemetry is something we focus on very deeply, and you can even export some of this data to things like Datadog, Grafana, Observe.
Mhm.
So that's a critical part of it. And then once you nail all of that, now you want to do distribution, right? Distribution can be internal. So there's companies with thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees, and they want their employees to use those applications. It could also be external. There's actually companies on Snowflake today. There's startups that were born on Snowflake to build applications here and sell them to the outside world.
Yeah,
And so
that's a key point. I guess how do you share securely with some of your key partners? Because you could have either customers, you could have upstream partners. Yeah, how do you go about doing that?
yeah, absolutely. It's a very hard problem to solve because, when you get it right, nobody hears about it, right? But when you get it wrong,
Yeah,
everybody hears about
everybody hears about it, right?
it.
Yeah.
So, so that's where, so we have something called Snowflake Native App Framework. And the idea here is that one company has their IP, which is the code, another company has their data. They want to do a transaction, but they don't trust each other. And they shouldn't have to because, one company has to do this transaction with many different companies. How do they vet everyone, right? So the native app framework comes in the middle, and what we say is we'll bring your IP into Snowflake natively, we'll bring your data into Snowflake natively, so the data never leaves Snowflake, and the transaction happens inside. So the model or the application lives on top of the data, does what it's supposed to do, and so everybody can just access this app. And then we have our Snowflake marketplace, right? So you can actually think of it like Android or iOS. You can publish these applications to our
Mm.
marketplace and then charge customers as they use it, right? And this is pretty sophisticated because you can do this in a serverless way so that you don't have to worry about the compute. But if you want to plug in a container, we also have the containerized version of it, right? So suddenly all you have to worry about is your business logic and your data. The rest, we take care of it. It scales automatically. The developer experience is pretty sophisticated. And so that's where, the magic really happens. In fact, it's so powerful that there's companies who've raised Series A as apps on Snowflake.
Hmm.
And those are doing super well right now.
Yeah, I could definitely see where you're an organization that has like a really strong vertical expertise, and then being able to offer up a consumable app that allows organizations of that vertical to unlock value out of their data. Absolutely, that's not something I'd thought about, but that's really interesting. So I know we're almost at the bottom of the hour, top of the hour, however you want to say it, almost at the end of our time here. So, I covered a lot of stuff. I know, for me, I really appreciate you breaking down that there's this sort of initial set of challenges, but then once we get past that, there's some additional things that we didn't know, and we had to move past that. And I appreciate the breakdown kind of the different maturity that organizations kind of go through. As we look forward, I always like to just, get a little bit of prognostication. What does the future hold? What are some of the trends that you think are going to be, that cutting edge organizations are going to be doing over the next, couple of years that are, or maybe they're already pushing, those things forward today. But what are some of the exciting things we're going to see when it comes to data, when it comes to analytics, when it comes to your space there at Snowflake?
Yeah, absolutely. So the world is very different thanks to this AI era we are in. And suddenly that just changes the realities, right? So, first of all, adopting AI, leveraging AI, this is just not even table stakes. It's DNA, it's foundational, it's survival, right?
Hmm.
Uh, so that's the first thing. And so when you want to adopt AI, yeah, in the consumer world, it's easy. Just go use ChatGPT to solve questions. But now bring that to enterprise, and suddenly the challenges in front of you are just so much more intense, right? So in the new world, the enterprise AI is becoming a critical thing. And to adopt enterprise AI, you need so many things you need to get them right.
Hmm.
It starts with, foundational, let's say, things like the ability to run models, the ability to store data, the ability to process data. But you need to get those absolutely nailed. The other thing that is super becoming critical is accuracy,
Hmm.
right? Yes, like when you want to talk to ChatGPT about your travel plans, you don't it doesn't matter if it gives you the wrong restaurant recommendation. But in the enterprise, right, you're making sometimes pretty critical decisions. Imagine in the medical industry or in the airlines or big marketing spends and things like that. And so suddenly efficiency and accuracy becomes super super critical. And so what we've seen is, in some of the hospitality industry, for example, people using Snowflake ML have reached up to 95% forecasting accuracy, right?
Hmm.
And they've seen up to 90% or over 90% efficiency gains by scaling their ML ops with us. So that's becoming super, super critical. Um, the other thing is, in terms of forward-looking stuff, right? Democratizing data is here to stay, right? In the old world, teams need to were controlling access as a way to secure data. That's just not going to fly anymore. Data needs to be out there. That needs to be democratized. People need to have self-serve access. So now it's a new set of challenges on how do you secure it in that world, right? And so the companies who I think will thrive will be the ones who nail this part. Is
Hmm.
that without limiting access to the data, how do I make sure the right people have the right access? And how do I make the security and the governance part seamless? And it gets out of the way of the innovation that happens, right? And finally, it's about speed. Speed is so paramount because there's a new model every day,
Hmm.
right? The models, the existing models, how they operate changes, right? The data access mechanisms change. How do you keep up with these trends? And you have to keep up, right? So this is where making strategic investments, for example, in Snowflake, we with Snowflake Cortex, for example, we give you the ability to not worry about the models, right? Like sometimes within hours of the models being available, we've been able to offer them to our
Hmm.
customers. And so that's becoming super, super critical to so that you can worry about your business logic, not to worry about the infrastructure.
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially I think democratization of data. That I agree. I think the more insights and the more analytics and the more tools that we can get into our people that are doing the work for us, then the more powerful, the more value they can all bring, and the more powerful that is. So yeah, thanks for joining me today, Kaser. I really appreciate it. I love it, like I said, when I get to talk to smart people like yourself and you get to bring insights and we get to sort of share those. So I really appreciate you jumping on today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you. And this is a very exciting set of questions that you asked. And honestly, I'll just say that the enterprise AI opportunity still hasn't been explored fully.
Mm.
And I think there's a lot in there that we have to yet to unpack. But it just poses a very, very cool, very, very scientific set of challenges we have yet to uncover.
Yeah, and I love how things are doable. We can tackle these challenges, and again, that's what I like about this is being able to have that conversation. So for those listening, thank you for joining us on the CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast. Until next time, keep growing, learning, and innovating.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you.